Hi. Hi, my name is Jenny Small, and I've been tutoring with literacy volunteers for 9 years. I'm not a trained teacher, although I do have 3 grown children, and I did substitute teach in middle school for a number of years. Anybody can do this. I've had 5 students over the past 9 years. Some have been just for a short time, and some have been for several years. Each student has been very unique, very different. They've all had different needs, and they all have different gifts. These are some of my tutoring stories, experiences that I've had over the years, and things that I've learned along the way. I have changed all the names of the students to protect their privacy. Pause. So what makes a good tutor anyway? Well, if you stop and think, a lot of us were very fortunate to have some great teachers in school growing up. I had 2 especially wonderful ones. One was Mrs. Herrick, who was a middle school teacher who used to read to us every day after lunch. She would read a chapter in a novel, and it was not part of the curriculum or anything. We would just sit there at our desks and listen to her read. And she had the most beautiful reading voice. It was so relaxing to listen to her. I didn't realize then what a special gift that was, because a lot of our students aren't used to hearing what it sounds like when somebody reads to them. So that makes a difference. With your students, it's nice to have you read a little bit and show them how nice and relaxing reading can be. Another teacher I had that was especially wonderful was Mrs. DeLessio. She was a 6th grade spelling teacher, and she used to teach us how to spell words with the way she spelled them out. For instance, the word necessary. She spells Necessary. Now, to this day, I can't say the word necessary or write it out without hearing Mrs. DeLessio in my head saying Necessary. So those kinds of tricks can help your student remember things, remember spelling, remember how words are spelled by how you pronounce them. I taught my kids how to spell the word knife because we used to call them knifies, just saying all of the letters in the word. So remember again that our students were not that fortunate. Many did not have good experiences in school. My student Jim was teased all through school. He had a learning disability, and nobody back then really understood that. He had 1 book at home, and his mother used to hit him over the head with it. So reading was not a part of his life growing up. Another one of my students, Chester, was interesting because he had so little experience with books, he didn't even understand how they were organized. We had read 1 chapter book, and the chapters were numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, like they are sometimes. After we finished that book, he brought in another book that he wanted to read. And he was all excited because this book had lots of different stories in it. And I looked at the book, and it was like, it's just a regular book. But the chapters, instead of being numbered, all had names to them. And because of that, he thought they were totally unrelated stories. And, something that we understand and take for granted, knowing, of course, organized. Our students may not. So, what's your first meeting going to be like? Well, I'll tell you, even though I have done tutor training and had a number of students, I've been doing this for a while, I'm always nervous. Just like you are meeting anybody new. One of the biggest things that makes a difference, I think, is finding something nice to say. And the story that I always tell about this is when I was a little girl and I had a birthday party, and my mother would, of course, take all my little girlfriends home afterwards, and I would go with her as we would drop all of my friends off at their house. And everybody, we were all chatting and laughing and giggling and still having a good time. And except for one of my friends who was very quiet. And the closer we got to her house, the quieter she got. She even, like, I remember her slinking down in the seat in the car. Well, we drove in her driveway, and it was the saddest little house I had ever seen. Just tar paper, run down, just awful. And as we drove in the driveway, my mother said, "Annette," she said, "I love your front door. I've always wanted a door with a diamond-shaped window in it." And Annette sat up and smiled. It made all the difference in the world when she knew that that was one nice thing that somebody could say about her house. And my mother said it, and it made all the difference in how Annette felt. So that was huge. How do you know where to start with your student? Well, oftentimes it's with reading or spelling, but sometimes it may not be. One of my students, I'll call Teresa, was a domestic abuse survivor, and she had suffered a traumatic brain injury. When the first time we met, she was telling me about the fact that she had had her own business before the accident, was doing very well, and after the accident she had to relearn everything. She could only count from 1 to 9. She didn't know that, she didn't understand how money worked at all. She thought that the bills were the only money that meant anything. Change was, just change, and it was useless. She would take all her change and she would put it in these great big old pickle jars. And apparently she had 2 or 3 of these full of change on her counter. And one of her ever so nice neighbors came over and offered to take those awful things off her counter. So she had more room. So obviously, that kind of told me that we needed to start with money. She was being taken advantage of. So that's what we did. We started with numbers and money. I would bring in a big bag of change, real change, in a Ziploc baggie, and every lesson we had, I would plop the baggie on the table. She would reach in, take out a handful, put it on the table, and she'd count it. And she learned. She learned easily that way. I think working with real change was key to that too. Paper money you can make out of anything, but pretend change just isn't right. So anyway, another thing that's really important when you are getting to know your student is letting them know that you don't know everything. One of my other students, I'll call Jim, was a real outdoors guy, big guy. Loved to fish and hunt and all of that stuff, archery. So I knew that ahead of time, so I went out and I got a hunting magazine. So we could at least look at the pictures and it would spark some conversation and all of that. So we did, we chatted about it, and we looked in the index to see if there was anything that he would be interested in reading, or me reading to him. And he chose this article on lighted sites. I had no idea what lighted sites were. And I told him, I said, what are those anyway? Well, he told me all about it. In archery, kind of like a gun sight, you have your sights and they have a little light on them, and it makes sense. But boy, he just was so excited to know something that I didn't know, and to be able to share it with me and teach me. That made him feel important. It helped build his ego and helped him be a lot more comfortable with me. Adults like to be in control of their environment, of their learning, of everything that they do. One day, my student Jim came in for our lesson and was all agitated, all upset. And I knew that the lesson I had planned was not going to be happening that day, because something was really on his mind. So we talked a little bit about it. Well, come to find out, he had been to Inland Fisheries and Wildlife to get a fishing license or something. And the clerk there was not very nice to him. She said some things that were not appropriate, and he was all wound up about it. So he told me about it, and I suggested that maybe we could write a letter to the head of Inland Fisheries just to let him know what happened. So he was kind of surprised. Come to find out, he'd never written a letter before of any kind. So we sat down, and I said, okay, so tell me exactly what happened in the order that it happened. So we wrote down everything, and I did the writing. I just wrote out sentences, skipping a line between each sentence, saying, he went in to get this, and he had to wait for 10 minutes, and then this lady came up, and this is what she said, and on like that. Then when he was all done with that, I said, now tell me what are the most important things do you think happened here? So we picked out a few, and I put stars next to them. And then we just constructed a letter. Well, it was amazing. This is the letter that he wrote. I did type it for him because his handwriting was still pretty bad. But I typed it just like he said it, and gave him a stamp, and we sent it off. And you could just tell as we were talking about it and as we were writing the letter, he calmed right down. He was in control of the situation now. He could do something about the way he had been treated. So that was so important. The next week, I was sitting in the office when he came in, and I said, "Oh, hi." I said, "Oh, shoot." I said, it's probably too early to have had a response from your letter." I turned around. He was waving an envelope, big smile, and he had gotten a response from the Commissioner of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife apologizing to him for how he had been treated. He was thrilled to pieces, and we read it together. It was kind of a form letter type thing. However, it was a response, and it meant that he could do something about that situation. I did the same thing with Teresa when she had had a bad experience at Friendly's with the service. We wrote a letter there, and the manager there called her to respond to her letter and offered her coupons for free free ice cream or something. So letting them know that they can be in control, that they can make a difference in how they're treated. Another important thing to remember, and this I learned from Teresa, is not to take any strategies that they've developed over the years, any of those coping skills that they have developed to deal with their reading difficulties. Don't take those away. They need those. And if you don't allow them to use those anymore, that's not going to go over so well. Teresa had, again, with her brain injury, she tended to reverse everything. She would tell me that we had a different alphabet than she did. She had a whole different thing. And I was like, different alphabet? What does that mean? And so I wrote out the alphabet. We said it. I sang the ABC song. She still didn't get it, but that's okay. I sang a different version of the ABC song. Didn't make any sense. So I finally said, okay, Teresa, what is your alphabet? She started at Z and went all the way to A just as fast as anything. And I was like, oh my gosh. I said, I can't do that. It was incredible. And I said, that's the same alphabet. It just starts over here. And I had my little alphabet strip all out. So I could show her that the letters were all the same, even though they seemed to be in a different order. She had been taking an adult ed class at the time. And when part of the lesson for that class, she had to put words in alphabetical order. So she would start at the bottom of the page and work her way up, putting the words in alphabetical order. Her teacher saw that and said, no, that wasn't correct. She had to start at the top and go down. Really? Does it matter? I don't think so. The same with looking up words in the dictionary. It was easier for her to start at the back and flip to the front than it was to go to front to back. No big deal. A lot of our students have learning disabilities, and a lot of people with learning disabilities tend to be tactile learners. They need to touch things. They need to use, they need to be able to hold things, arrange things with their hands, move things around. That makes a really big difference on how they learn. My friend Fred loves the whiteboards. He just doing the writing himself and being able to erase makes a big difference to how things sink in. I had one student, I'll call him Matthew. He's a truck driver. Couldn't read 3-letter word. It's amazing that he drove all over the country and he couldn't read. So one day I was thinking about that, and the song On the Road Again with Willie Nelson came on. And it made me think of Matthew. So I went online and I printed out the lyrics to On the Road Again. And then online I found, on YouTube I found Willie Nelson actually singing the song. So when Matthew came in, I asked him if he knew Willie Nelson. Well, of course he did. This guy was from Texas too, by the way. So I asked if he liked him. Yeah, he did. So I played him the song, and he knew the song. And so I showed him the paper where I had printed out all the words, and we read the words together as Willie Nelson sang the song. So after we did that a couple of times, I took each line of the song and I printed them out on little sentence strips. And I had him read them. And because they were words that he knew, they became sight words for him, and he could learn them. He put all the sentence strips in order how the song went. We would shuffle them around, and he would put them in different orders, and he would read them over and over again, which he did a great job with. After that, I figured we'll just keep going here with this. And I printed off the individual words to the song. Again, just on the computer, just really easy. And made these sight word lists. I cut each word out, and then we made these same sentences out of the individual words and put the song together that way. And he learned so many sight words just through this one little way of getting through to him. He even went a little further and started making new sentences out of the words that were cut out here. So that was really cool too. Another way you can use writing in your lessons. My student Jim and I read Lost on a Mountain in Maine by Don Fendler. And it was the first real full book that Jim had read. And we talked a lot about it. This little boy who was lost in the outdoors, my student really liked and could relate to his experiences in the woods and everything. So when we were done that, I suggested that maybe he'd like to write a letter to Don Fendler. He was still alive. So he was really surprised at that, but he did. He wrote a beautiful letter. We sent it off, and of course, Don Fendler replied and wrote a beautiful, beautiful response back. I take copies of things. I always ask a student, but I took a copy of the letter that Jim wrote to Mr. Fendler, and it's a great thing to look back on and show not only Jim but also other tutors, so they know that you're really, really making a big difference. Another fun writing activity you wouldn't normally maybe think of is writing in an online obituary guest book. This same student, Jim, had a friend who had passed away, and his wife had written in the online guest book, and he wanted to see it. So I didn't have a newspaper with me, so I looked up the obituary online, and we read it, and then we looked at the guest book and found the piece that his wife had written, and to see his wife's words talking about somebody that he was very close to was very powerful for him, and he was very, very interested in that. There was one beautiful entry by somebody else. I'm not sure who it was, but he wrote in this online guest book. The spelling was terrible. It was spelled phonetically, so you could certainly read what the words were, but it wasn't spelled correctly. And the gentleman had written that he wanted to write this obituary, this note in the obituary himself, and he knew that he couldn't spell it all, but he wanted to make sure that his friend knew that he had done that. So if he spelled everything right, it wouldn't be the same. So that was really sweet.
Let's take a break.